The illusion of invincibility. But one day, the great Mkali grew old, and the strength in his roar began to fade. He didn't want anyone to know. He was still the king, or so he believed. The dry season lingered longer than usual that year. The river that curled like a silver snake through the savannah had shrunk to a muddy trickle. The baobab trees stood bare, their branches like ancient hands reaching for a sky that gave no rain. Dust rose with every step across the ground, clinging to fur, feather, and hoof. The animals were quieter now. The herds moved in tighter groups, conserving their strength and seeking shade wherever it could be found. The days were longer, hotter, heavier. Even the wind seemed to sleep. But still, Mkali roared. Every morning, like the ticking of a great clock, he climbed his rock, more slowly now, and threw his voice across the land. His roar echoed as it always had, but if one listened closely, they would hear a difference. A faint crackle in the sound. A moment's hesitation between breaths. He didn't like it. Nor did he speak of it. He roared louder, hoping volume would cover the fading strength. "Let the land know I am still here," he growled one morning, pacing restlessly on his rock. "Let them remember who I am." And they did. They remembered. But it wasn't the same. The hyenas, once silent when he passed, had started to mutter behind bushes. The cheetahs no longer bowed their heads as low. Even the jackals, sly and watchful, whispered to one another with eyes sharp and voices low. "He doesn't chase like he used to. His limp is growing worse. His roar sounds tired." But no one said it to his face. Not yet. Because fear lingers longer than strength. Still, word spread like fire in the dry grass. The king was aging. The throne was weakening. But Mkali would not accept it. Could not. His pride was thicker than his mane and twice as tangled. He refused to rest. Refused to ask for help. Refused to slow down, though his bones ached and his hands took longer and left him sore for days. Even when he failed to catch a gazelle that had once been easy prey, he growled at the earth as if it had betrayed him. "The sun is hotter," he muttered. "The ground is softer. That gazelle was lucky." But he never said, "I am tired." He never said, "I am not as fast." And he certainly never said, "I am afraid." Because kings don't say such things. And yet, high above, watching from the twisted branches of a thirsty tree, Ndid the fly saw it all. She had followed him for days, buzzing unseen through the air, landing on leaves, watching from the shadows. She could see the stiffness in his walk, the heavy pause before each roar. She saw the way his tail dragged when no one was looking. The sadness that flickered through his eyes when he thought he was alone. But more than anything, she saw the loneliness. The kind that wraps around the mighty when their strength begins to fade. The kind that comes when others bow not out of respect, but habit. When the throne becomes a cage. Ndid understood. She had flown over villages where old elephants were left behind by their herds. She had seen old hawks pushed from nests by their own young. The wild respected strength. It had little use for weakness. And so Mkali roared louder and walked prouder and bore his pain like a crown, even as it cracked. One afternoon, as the sun bled into the horizon, painting the sky in burnt orange and blood red, Mkali stood at the edge of the riverbank. The water was low, brown, and sluggish. He lowered his head to drink. A group of monkeys watched from the trees. They laughed. Not loudly, but loud enough. Mkali lifted his head, water dripping from his whiskers. His eyes blazed. But his roar came out thin. Dry. Like wind through hollow bones. The monkeys scattered, but not in panic. They moved with mischief, not fear. And that stung more than a wound. Mkali stood there for a long time after they had gone, staring into the muddy water. He saw his reflection, the king's face, yes, but framed with graying fur around his muzzle. His eyes, once bright and fire-filled, looked duller now. Tired. He growled and turned away. But Ndid, hovering nearby, felt a pang of something like sorrow. Even the mighty deserved to age with grace. But Mkali's pride would not let him. Back on his heel, he tried to roar again. It echoed once. Fell flat. The stars blinked awake above him, but he did not smile this time. He did not listen for whispers. He knew they were not what they once were. That night he lay on the rock not as a king, but as a lion. A lion holding on to a crown made of shadows. And the fly. She waited. Not to strike. Not to laugh. But to remind him, in time, that life's worth was not only in strength, but in being alive at all. The day Mkali couldn't roar. Then came the day when Mkali tried to roar and nothing came out. His mouth opened wide, but the savannah had only silence. The morning began like many others before it, with golden light spilling across the land like honey. Birds chirped softly in the acacia trees, and the insects buzzed their tiny songs into the air. The world looked the same, but for Mkali, something was deeply wrong. He felt it before he even opened his eyes. There was a heaviness in his chest. Not pain, at least not the sharp kind, but a weight. As though the earth had curled a finger around his ribs during the night and pressed down. His mouth was dry, his breath short. He shifted his paw and winced. But worse than all of that was what he felt in his throat. It was as if his roar, the mighty sound that had ruled the savannah, had turned to dust. He sat up slowly, the morning light striking the gold in his mane. High on his rock, the world below waited, just as it always had. Wildebeests moved in dark clusters across the plains. A family of elephants stomped through the tall grass. Gazelles twitched their ears. Somewhere, monkeys were already gossiping. It was time. Time for the roar that began each day. Time to remind them all that the king still watched. Mkali drew in a deep breath. The wind tickled his nose. He opened his great mouth, sharp teeth gleaming in the sun. Nothing. Not a sound. Not a whisper. Not a rumble. Just silence. He blinked. He tried again. He planted his paws firmly and inhaled deeper. His lungs burned. His chest strained. Still nothing. Only a dry, hoarse cough, like wind scraping through a hollow log. He stood there for a moment, stunned. The king of the savannah, speechless. At first, he refused to believe it. He tried again and again, shaking his mane, pacing back and forth, forcing air through his throat. But the harder he pushed, the more painful it became. His breathing grew ragged. His sides ached. And the silence only deepened. Down in the valley, the pair of meerkats looked up. "Did you hear it?" asked the smaller one. "No roar today," said the other. "Maybe he's sleeping in." But others noticed too. The elephants paused. The antelope sniffed the wind. The hyenas crept out of their dens a little earlier, lifting their heads, waiting for the sound that never came. The king had gone quiet. And the silence was loud. Up on his rock, Mkali sat still. His ears flicked. His tail curled around his paws. He didn't want to go down. Didn't want the others to see his mouth open and nothing come out. He had roared every day since he was strong enough to stand. It was more than a sound, it was who he was. It was power, pride, and presence all in one. And now it was gone. All around, the savannah began to stir as if nothing had happened. As if the sun had risen just the same and the breeze still moved the tall grass. But to Mkali, everything had changed. From the edge of a fig tree branch, Ndid the fly hovered silently. She had seen it all. The open mouth. The silence. The shock in the lion's eyes. She didn't laugh. She didn't gloat. Instead, she flew a little closer, buzzing gently in the air near his ear, not to mock him, but to witness him. To be a tiny piece of truth beside a giant who had always lived by image and fear. Mkali swatted at the sound, frustrated, but his paw passed through empty air. "I am still king," he muttered hoarsely. "I am still Mkali." But even he didn't believe it. The monkeys began to chatter. One bold voice said, "Did you hear the roar this morning?" "No roar today," another answered. "Maybe the king has caught a cold. Or maybe the king is just tired." Laughter followed. High, echoing giggles from branches. Mkali's ears flattened. "Silence," he tried to shout, but only a harsh whistle came out. The laughter grew louder. That night, he didn't eat. He lay on his rock in the dim light, staring at the moon. His stomach rumbled, but he didn't move. He thought about the first time he'd roared, back when he was just a young cub with a heart too big for his body. His father had roared then too, deep and powerful, and Mkali had wanted nothing more than to sound just like him. And he had, in time. More than that, he'd surpassed him. He'd ruled. But now he could not even speak. The stars were silent. And so was the king. Only the wind moved that night. And the fly, Ndid, drifted quietly above the lion's head. She could have flown anywhere. But she stayed. Because even kings need witnesses in their silence. And even kings, especially kings, must learn that when the voice is gone, it is the heart that remains. The savannah begins to change. And while the lion rested quietly, the savannah began to change. The hyenas grew bolder. The monkeys laughed louder. The balance was shifting. The days passed slowly after Mkali lost his roar. The sun rose and set with the same golden rhythm, but the air beneath it no longer trembled with power. The morning sky, once split by a thunderous roar, now greeted the plains with only birdsong and wind. The silence stretched, and with it, something in the savannah began to unravel. The first to notice were the hyenas. They had always lurked in the shadows, creeping just outside the lion's watchful gaze. When Mkali's roar thundered, they fled. When he slept on the high rock, they slunk past with wary eyes and lowered heads. But now, they moved differently. They no longer crept. They strutted. In twos and threes, then fives and sixes, they came, slinking through the grass with wide grins and confident steps. They no longer waited for the scraps left behind by the lion's hunt. Instead, they began to chase. A zebra here. A young antelope there. They snatched food out from under the noses of frightened cheetahs, and they mocked the vultures who used to get the lion's leftovers. One morning, they even climbed the lower edge of Mkali's rock, something none had dared to do before. They didn't climb to fight him. They didn't need to. They just wanted to see if they could. Mkali watched them from above. He did not rise. His bones ached more with each morning, and without his roar, he knew any display of aggression would only make them bolder. He was still king. But now, his rule had become silent and soft. The monkeys noticed next. They had always been noisy, swinging from branch to branch, arguing over fruit, telling tall tales. But now their chatter took on a sharper tone. "Where is the king?" one monkey asked from the fig tree. "Sleeping," another giggled. "No," said a third, "the king is quiet now. He has no teeth left." Laughter echoed through the branches like falling rain. Mkali could hear it all from his rock. The wind carried their words, and though they stung, he did not react. He had always known that respect won by fear was easily lost. Still, it was a bitter truth to taste. Even the antelopes, usually cautious and respectful, began grazing closer to the rock. Some dared to glance upward with curiosity rather than awe. Others even looked away, no longer watching the throne that had once made their hearts race. Balance was tipping. Not all at once, but slowly, delicately, like a pot left to boil over. The elephants, wise and proud, noticed the change and grew concerned. One old bull, with tusks long as tree branches, approached the base of the rock and called up, "Mkali, are you well?" Mkali nodded but said nothing. He couldn't speak. He hadn't in days. The elephant sighed, trunk swaying. "The land feels different," the bull murmured. "The winds carry uncertainty now. The jackals fight more. The birds flee sooner." Mkali gave no reply, but his eyes showed he understood. The elephant stayed a while, keeping silent company. Then he bowed his head and walked away, slow and heavy. Even the trees seemed to whisper differently now. The acacias bent lower. The baobabs stood stiffer. The tall grasses rustled with rumors. But high on the rock, Mkali remained. Watching. Listening. His strength was still in his body, though not as it once had been. His eyes were still sharp, his claws still strong. But what the world remembered was his voice. And that voice was no longer there to remind them. Still, he remained. Because something the fly had said, something light and small, echoed louder than any roar. Your life is what gives your raw meaning. He did not need to roar to be alive. And being alive meant he still had a choice. To rule with sound or with presence. He began to come down from the rock more often, not to fight, not to hunt, but to walk. Slow, strong steps across the land. He stood beside the watering hole. The animals scattered at first, uncertain. But then he only drank quietly and lay down. He watched the sky, the clouds, and the hyenas watched him too. They didn't approach. Not yet. But they whispered. Is he weak? Is he dying? Maybe. Or maybe he's waiting. The monkey clans paused their laughter when Mkali passed beneath their trees. They expected him to ignore them, to show his age and silence. But he would stop, look up, and meet their gaze, not with pride, not with anger, but with understanding. And they fell quiet. Because sometimes, being seen is more powerful than being feared. Indeed, the fly returned from time to time. She never spoke again. She didn't need to. But she flew near his mane, dancing in the air, her wings humming a tune that only Mkali seemed to hear. A tune of stillness, of presence, of a king who remained, not because of what he could do, but because he still was alive. The lion's quiet strength. The lion never roared again. But he lived. And his silence became the sound the animals listened to most. The sun rose every morning over the savannah, casting golden threads across the tall grass and warming the backs of every creature from the slow tortoise to the soaring eagle. Life moved on, but now it moved in a different rhythm. The lion, once the thunder in the morning, had become the stillness in the day. Mkali no longer roared, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. Whatever had taken his voice had not returned it, and he had accepted that. But he never stopped walking the land. He never stopped showing up. And slowly, his silence began to speak. It spoke to the mothers nursing their cubs in fear of rising hyena packs. It spoke to the young cheetahs watching from under shady trees, wondering if a world without the lion's roar still had rules. It spoke to the elephants, who gathered at dusk and remembered what true strength looked like, not loud and boastful, but calm and present. Mkali had become a symbol. And that symbol did more than his roar ever could. One afternoon, the sky was dark with storm clouds, and the air smelled of coming rain. Mkali rested under a mayula tree, his golden coat dulled with dust. He blinked slowly, watching the horizon. Suddenly, cries rang out across the plain. High-pitched, desperate cries. The lion's ears perked. From behind the tall grass came the frantic form of a young gazelle. It stumbled, tripped, scrambled up again. Behind it, a pair of hyenas gave chase, snapping and laughing, their eyes full of cruel play. The animals watching from nearby held their breath. In the past, the sound of a lion's roar would have ended the chase. It would have shattered the air and sent the hyenas scurrying. But now there was no roar. Only a lion, still and silent beneath the mayula tree. The hyenas didn't notice Mkali at first. But the gazelle did. It dashed toward him, trembling, as if hoping that even a voiceless king could help. Mkali rose. Slowly. Gracefully. The hyenas finally saw him, massive and golden, his mane like an old fire waiting to blaze. They stopped. One snickered. "He can't roar," it said. The other growled low, "He's just a shadow now." But then Mkali stepped forward. His eyes locked on theirs, not with rage, but with truth. Not a threat. A promise. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence, his choice to stand between the prey and the predator, was louder than any sound. The hyenas paused. Their instincts flickered like candle flames in the wind. They remembered how Mkali had fought off a pack of wild dogs years ago. They remembered the buffalo he had taken down alone when food was scarce. They remembered the lion who had once roared so fiercely the earth seemed to shake. And now he was here. Quiet. But very much alive. The lead hyena hissed. "He's old. He's soft." But he didn't move. The other tugged at his ear with its teeth. "He's watching. Let's go." They turned. Not because of sound. But because of memory. Because of presence. The gazelle stood frozen, panting. Mkali didn't chase the hyenas. He didn't look triumphant. He only lay down again beneath the tree and closed his eyes. The gazelle backed away, then ran off toward safety. The other animals had watched. All of them. Birds from above. Antelope from afar. Even the monkeys in the fig trees. They began to understand. Mkali was no longer the king because he roared. He was king because he chose to remain. To stay. To stand. To live. Not for power. For purpose. That evening, when the rains finally fell, Mkali stood in the open and let the drops wash over him. He didn't flinch when thunder rolled. He didn't blink when lightning flashed. He welcomed the storm the same way he welcomed his silence, with quiet strength. As the rain poured across the land, soaking roots and riverbeds and filling watering holes, the animals moved together beneath trees and caves. The fly, indeed, sheltered beneath a leaf near the lion and watched him calmly breathe. She smiled. Not because the lion had returned to greatness, but because he had never truly left it. Even voiceless, he had found a way to matter. Not through fear, but through being. The next morning, the savannah woke to soft clouds and sparkling grass. The lion was still silent. But every animal remembered the day before. They didn't speak of Rose anymore. They spoke of courage. Of kindness. Of Mkali, the lion who stayed even when the world changed. And they listened, not to noise, but to silence. Because silence, when chosen, is its own kind of power.